Hi, everyone. How are you? Uh, it's been an interesting week, hasn't it? So I thought I'd take the opportunity here to spend a few minutes talking about what happened with the midterm. I know that it is, it's was a shock to a lot of people. It was difficult, and I'm sorry for all the people that were shocked and for what happened. But this wasn't my fault. And I say that because, a lot of people seem to be blaming me and angry at me. And I didn't cause this problem. And even the people who were involved in it, you should actually be thanking me and not being angry at me. And I sincerely mean that because, well, one, I've decided not to, file an official report on what happened. And furthermore, because I did stop you from doing something stupid, which was an actual act of academic dishonesty. And if you're familiar with what happens to people who do that at UCSB, you didn't want that to happen. So I short-circuited all this, short-circuited it all before it happened. So still, I don't expect people to be happy with me. I'm not sure why people are so angry with me, but okay. And that anger has been playing out, of all places, on Rate My Professor, where, it's surprisingly split here. I feel like it's kind of like our nation right now with opinions. That either majority of the comments are either ones or fives, and for all the people who wrote the kind things in the last few days, thank you very much. I did appreciate it. But for the people who didn't, I wanted to comment on your concerns because I do take them seriously. So I guess what I'm saying, underneath the anger and emotion there, people were saying a couple things that I think need to be addressed and clarified. And I thought I clarified these before, but let me do it in a very specific way now, because I just want people to understand, why the course is set up the way it is and what we're doing. And after I do that, we can jump into Vance Packard and the waste makers, which of course is the subject of this deep dive. So people have been frustrated that this course takes a lot of time. And if you remember, way back in the beginning of the term, I said that this is not an easy course if you don't put in the work. People, for example, noted that, it was just crazy. You have to watch 4 hours of videos per week in this course. But you have to do that. That's the basic way that accreditation works at a university. So let me explain what I mean. This is a 4-unit course. 4-unit course means that you have 4 hours of instruction per week. So how does this work in practice? Well, the way English 22 was taught a few years ago is probably the best example. And that is, it was taught 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for 50 minutes a day. So you actually had to come to class, not for an hour, a little under 50 minutes. And the idea is that it gives people time to go from one class to another. But that counts as an hour. So that was 3 hours. And then there was a 4th hour, which was a section that you had with your TA, which was for 50 minutes each. 3 plus 1 is 4 credit hours. That's what you need to do for any 4-credit course at any university, anywhere. You need to put in 4 hours of viewing. Now, I changed how that works a couple times till we got to the format here, and then had to change it again now that we're online because of COVID. So one of the things I did a few years ago was to introduce films on Fridays to make it more enjoyable than to just watching three classes of me talking, to reduce that. And I thought that the videos are every bit as instructive, and it's been borne out in this class. By the way, you've been responding to the videos that you're, getting a lot out of them. But that cut out basically a quarter of an hour of the actual lecture time. But then a few years ago, I switched things around by putting the videos up online, and that did away with the sections, because I thought for a class this large, it's just an awful lot to have to do section as well and prepare for that. So then what I had was 3 days a week coming in and watching me during lecture, which is what happened. It was exactly how the format was last year in English 23. Even though it's COVID, we have to do the same thing for a 4-credit course. Well, again, a quarter of it, a little more even, is watching the videos. But then you have to have 3 hours of lecture. It's just the only way to do it. How did I break that down? Well, you have the 2 little lectures each week, my introducing the films, my introducing the lectures. You also have my separate lectures, like the one I recently did on, electric cars are a problem. And then you have the deep dives. If you add up the fact that the deep dives are an hour or a little longer, you add up the 2 short introductory videos, the lecture should come in at about 3 hours, maybe a little less even, but since the documentaries are a little longer than an hour, that all balances out. So for the people who are frustrated that you have to watch 4 hours, you have to do that. You would have to be attending 4 hours of class. If it were a traditional course, you'd be coming to lecture either 3 times a week for 50 minutes or 2 times for an hour and 15 minutes. And you would also be going to section as well. This short circuits all that. But the deep dives are absolutely required for that reason. And, they're half the class. They're half of, you can call them credit hours. We also call them contact hours. They're half the contact hours for the course is the deep dives. Now, you may not like the format of the deep dives because, you wish there was more material or it wasn't me just responding to other students. Someone noticed they just didn't see the point of me responding to students, that this is all just a big waste of time. Okay, well, in my other course, English 22, I structured it entirely differently. I thought this way is more interesting. Breaking it up with the short lecture, the short introductions and all, made the material more interesting and not as much to watch. But in English 22, what I do is I have 2 lectures per week that are like an hour and 15 minutes. And during COVID, they were online for an hour and 15 minutes. In the actual class, we break them up into 3 classes of 50 minutes each. But okay, so you have 2 hour and a quarter lectures. Now, okay, let's talk about Vance Packard. Say Vance Packard had been the subject of this week's lecture, and I had put it online. I put them online as a Prezi, but you could do it as a PowerPoint. I just think Prezi makes it more accessible and interesting. But okay. I could have given you a lot of information on Vance Packard. That's the way a course like this would have traditionally been set up. What I mean by that, I could have given you biographical information on Vance Packard. I could have given you material on what led to Vance Packard. In other words, he is not the person who figures all this out all by himself. There have been decades of people analyzing what's happening with media, and Packard, although a great communicator, is a journalist, not a research person. He didn't come up with all this. And I could have told you who came up with it all. And I could have let you know that he was not an innovator here, that even the year before that this book appeared, Volkswagen actually had an ad where they talk about planned obsolescence and why their cars, don't change style. That the VW Beetle didn't change style for decades, and they were, eschewing the idea of planned obsolescence. I could have done all that, and it would have been a lot of material on the slides. And then I could have talked about, what in some sense is even more important, the reception history, what we call in literary circles, what people thought of the book and the implications that it had, and the subsequent works that came after it, how influential it was in the 1960s, 1970s, even today. I would have talked about Vance Packard's subsequent works addressing it, and a lot of work since then addressing it. That would have been a traditional lecture on this. It would have been all up there, basically like a bunch of PowerPoint slides, boom, 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 one after another, with all that material laid out. The problem is, while I find that interesting, I don't think any of that is very important. Don't get me wrong. If you're actually studying this, and for the scholars that study it and people go on to study marketing, that's great. But for a broad audience like you folks who have, range of different interests and majors. I don't think that's important. What I do think is important, however, is that each of you think about the implications of marketing and consumerism personally in your lives. That's the goal of this course. It is not to give you a bunch of facts like that, because you'll forget those facts in a month or 2 or 12 months or whatever, or remember very little. But I would rather you have a general engagement with this concept and think about what consumerism means for you and for the planet. This course is structured just for you that way. What I mean by that is, we're doing a focus this week on clothing by way of the true cost. Next week, it's going to be on food systems by way of cowspiracy. And I'm approaching this with things that you would directly encounter and think about. So in other words, if I were teaching this course for a generation before you, millennials who are, thinking about things like housing and all, it would be very different. I would be talking about housing. I'd be talking about the situation with suburbia, how it works. I'd be talking about mass transit. I'd be talking about other options like micro apartments and co-housing. All that we talk about a little in this class, but not much, because the focus is on things that would matter to you. This course is designed to bring up these questions in a way that matter to you, and to, in a very general way, address issues that are important. In other words, let's go to the big takeaway here from the waste makers. Well, first, that for 70 years, we've known this, and we didn't do a damn thing about it. And for 70 years, this has been getting worse. I mean, Vance Packard was writing at a time where, marketers had at their disposal, black and white TVs with 3 networks, and that was it. And that's how they were getting the message across in whatever print publications they were in. The world has changed so fundamentally. Marketing has been so ramped up. I mean, to say it's like what Vance Packard described, on steroids, this doesn't even get the point. It's going crazy. The other takeaway is that, if you buy into the fact that this is all our fault as consumers, in other words, that's what marketers would like to tell us. They just make a product. We want it. They make it. It's, it's what we want. They're not at fault. If they didn't do it, some other company would. Well, I think after reading Vance Packard, again, forgetting any of the details of Vance Packard, that that's not entirely true, that corporations and marketers are doing an incredible amount to literally raise us from childhood up as consumers. And they're going to great lengths to manipulate us in a whole range of different ways. Now, does that take, all the blame off the consumer? I think it's not good to look at it that way, because to ascribe all agency to the people marketing, takes us out of the picture. And what I mean by that, it takes agency away from us. It takes options away from us, because we can opt out of this system, which is what, Henry David Thoreau was arguing to do for a while. And in some sense, what this course is about is kind of like what Thoreau did for 2 years. This course is about, for 10 weeks, for you to kind of stop and think about things in your life, things that you may not have thought of before, or vaguely aware of, how bad consumerism was, or, you knew something about, fast fashion. Fine. But it's to think about it more. The space where that thinking is taking place are the comments. If people don't think they're important, I think they are incredibly important. I think that they are the most important part of this class. You may say, but wait a minute, I'm in here to listen to what the professor has to say. I don't want to listen to what a lot of students have to say. I think that's misguided, and I don't think it's the way a good class ever has worked. In other words, a small seminar, how would it work? Be a bunch of people in a room, 10, 15, whatever, and professor would be talking and students would be talking. Professor would be responding to what the students said. Other students would be responding to each other. As much as I can, I tried to set up this course to do that. Obviously it's during COVID, it's online, it's not going to be quite the same. But in a way, it's every bit as good or better. And why I say that, the responses that people are making are not just something that you have to do off the cuff in a seminar, but people are taking time and writing out some really amazing comments. And I think that they are, absolutely terrific. I mean, the quality of them and the amount of thought that's gone into them, it's just amazing. Not all of them, okay? I know that a lot of people are just phoning in the comments. And hey, look, I mean, I do textual analysis. That's what I do, and it's very obvious that some people are literally just reading a few other comments, aggregating them together, rewording it themselves, and calling that the comment without doing any thought at all. And in that sense, they're completely subverting what I want for you in this class, which is to engage with this material. That's what it's about. And as far as the examinations, I mean, all that we are testing for really is that you're engaging with the material. So there are little spot checks to see that you've actually been watching all of the documentaries, you've been doing all the readings carefully, and you've been paying attention to my lectures. If you're doing all that, you should be doing fine. And as I noted in one of my recent emails, half the class, half of our class is well on the way to getting an A-range grade for this. And I would argue because they're doing all that. I know that other people are frustrated because they don't have time to do it or whatever, and I'm sorry, but it's what is required. And I think it's just, I mean, from my point of view, to have you stop, and reflect on your life during these 10 weeks is incredibly important. It is far more important for me than if I had just splashed fact after fact after fact and had a whole, module on wind turbines and another on solar panels. It's not the way this course works. It's not the way that I approach it. There are people who would, of course, coming at it from the point of view of the sciences and applied sciences, technology, do just that. But I am not that kind of person. I look at this as a cultural problem. I look at it as a social problem, social justice problem in many cases. And that's how the course is laid out. And I'm sorry if that's not working for people, and I'm sorry if you're not getting into that project. And my takeaway from what I've read, and people are just debating it back and forth, is that the people who have, gotten into that project, you're going to be reading them today when we look at, Vance Packard here. The people who have done that are getting a lot out of the class, and the people and other people are frustrated. And maybe it's because the unusual format here, maybe it's just the workload and the 4 hours that you have to watch a week, but okay, looking at the clock, I could probably spend the whole time talking about this, but I've said some of this before in the introductory material, but I just wanted to make people, trying to get people to understand why I'm doing what we're doing, why the course is set up this way. I'm sorry if you're not enjoying the deep dives. I know you're looking at me a lot, but, the sad part is that's more of a format thing here than it is the true focus. And what I mean by that is the focus on the deep dives is not on me talking. Yes, I know that you watch me talk for an hour, and as people said, I seem to like my own voice, sound of my own voice, because I just talk and talk and talk, and I get that. And other people have noticed that, I talk and talk and talk, and there are no testables in what I say. In other words, you can't test on what I just said. In other words, I'm looking here, I've talked for 18 minutes or so. You can't get tested on those 18 minutes, and that might be like frustrating. Like, what the hell is the point? He's just talking. Where's the stuff we're going to get tested on? I just don't see it that way. I think what I just said is important because it actually talks about, what's going on in the class here. But the deep dives we're going to get to directly is about what you've thought, what people in the class have thought, and you have the opportunity to review that yourself. But I'm going to be looking over those comments and pulling out things that are especially important. And yes, some of those are testables that you can get tested on, but it's really not the point. It's to let you know that people are really thinking about this and coming from different perspectives. Thinking about the comments that we're going to be looking at in a moment, there are people from a range of different backgrounds, from a range of different places. Someone had a really extraordinarily great comment on what this means, not for the U.S. in 1960 or in 2020, but from where this person comes from, which is China. We have an incredibly diverse class, many international students here, and many students from a range range of different, backgrounds and situations. And it's fascinating to see all these different perspectives going on and people wrestling with this. And at the end of the day, and this is going to be my last thing, I want to go for 20 minutes here. At the end of the day, that's what this course is about. It is not to provide you with a bunch of facts, but it's to get you wrestling with this. Because I can tell you right now, I don't have answers to what to do with this problem with consumerism. What I mean by that is it's gone on for 70 years and it's gotten stronger and stronger. We can kind of look at the limits of it, what's happening, but what we really need to do is think of ways of addressing this. And ultimately, that is something that is for you to do. With all of these issues, this is something for you. By that I mean your generation, people like you in your generation who are going to go out in the world and do things in the world. Hopefully some of you will do things. I mean, maybe you will go into marketing in itself and revise the way marketing works. Maybe you'll go into policy and change the way that we, what happens and how we allow things like this to take place. Maybe you'll start making products, a different kind of products. I don't know what you're going to do. But hopefully, in the back of your mind, when you do whatever it is you're doing, will be this idea. Again, no specific fact about Vance Packard, but this idea of the way consumerism functions in this country. Okay, I'll stop. Let's jump right into today's lecture. So, I wanted to start with this quote. This is by a guy named Victor Lebeau, published in 1955. And as I note here, it's in the Journal of Retailing. This is not a scholar here who thought about this. This is a guy who basically lays out the mission statement for the consumer economy. Again, 75 years ago, our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek out our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. The measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns. The very meaning and significance of our lives is expressed in consumptive terms. The greater the pressures upon the individual to conform to safe and accepted social standards, the more does he tend to express his aspirations and his individuality in terms of what he wears, drives, eats, his home, his car, his pattern of food serving, his hobbies, and so forth. These commodities and services must be offered to the consumer with a special urgency. We require not only forced draft consumption, but expensive consumption as well. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. We need to have people eat, drink, dress, ride, live with ever more complicated and therefore constantly more expensive consumption. I read that all, and sorry if you thought that was a waste of time, you reading it when you could have read it, but I read it so you all listen to it, and maybe you're just listening to this lecture, which is fine. But Jesus, that is an utterly startling statement. It could have been made by a crazy person in 1955. In other words, who would have ever thought that was supposed to happen, that consumption or buying, selling, using up and throwing away stuff would be the basis of our lives, that's what we were about. But that's what was imagined by Lebeau and presented in the Journal of Retailing to the U.S. in 1955. And it's remarkably prescient. I mean, if you look at all the people, if you go through history, like who were really important people who were architects of the future, and who were they? And they're incredibly important people along the way, right? But he's one of them. You probably never heard of him before, but I think he's absolutely one of them. Now, he's not the only one, but he really, if you were writing this down as a mission statement for corporate America, there it is. And, that's an extraordinary thing to think about because, in a way, it's kind of like the Matrix, right? The idea that, we human beings are just the stuff used by this system. We kind of are. I mean, we might have thought that these corporations and marketers and producers, they're there for us, right? They serve us. They serve us by giving us things that we want, and they have to keep coming up with good stuff because we're demanding on how we want to be served. That's a nice way of putting us in the center of things, but flipping the whole thing around, we serve them. They have raised us, like the Matrix, from children up to be consumers, to supply them with what they need, which is money. Put it in a short way, this is not about making you happy as a consumer. This is all about making them happy and successful as corporations. The whole system is designed to make them happy. Don't get me wrong. The marketing suggests, all of it almost always suggests, that this will make you happier or make your life better, whatever that product, whatever that service is. That's the dream. That's what they sell. But as people noticed here, and we're going to see throughout the term, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't work that way. Momentarily, sure, you get the latest generation of iPhone, you're pretty happy for a while. But there have actually been studies about that, by the way, that, people get an iPhone. I may have mentioned this. The first few weeks, they bring it out often so that people notice that you have that new iPhone in your hand. People are proud of it and all. 2-3 years later, the emotion connected with that iPhone is not pride, but shame, because you don't bring it out, because you have the older one. You don't have 3 cameras on the back of your phone. People have the newer, better one and all. And it doesn't matter. It could be wearing clothes, that were fashionable 2 years ago. What is it but shame? That is set up that way to keep you buying again and again and again. So it's not going to make you happy. I mean, momentarily perhaps, but in the long run, not. And in the long run, it's going to keep you on the treadmill of buying and buying and buying in pursuit of that transient happiness. But the real happiness, in the sense of the real satisfaction, will come from the corporations. All right, let's go into the first comment. This person is actually quoting from Vance Packard. Thus, the challenge was to develop a public that would always have an appetite as voracious as its machines. What a sickening line. American public is being convinced by the manufacturing and advertising industries to purchase items in order to ensure the wheels of production are never still. So this is what it's about. I mean, this person has focused right in on it. This system is designed to keep the wheels of production in motion. But as this person notes, this is completely backwards to how production and consumption should work, especially if you look at it from an environmental standpoint. Before mass production, most goods were made on an as-needed basis. If you needed a dress, you got fabric, and that was made. Now we aren't even sure if we need another dress. We would probably do it because, you look at that cute dress or whatever and the online ads, and it's ready to purchase, and there you go. This is related to last week's minimalist and Walden discussion, because this is really a continuation of that. But the person notes here, but the American economy has been built on the notion that a healthy economy is one that grows due to increased consumption. In order to prolong this unsustainable economic path, the entire advertising industry was created, and all this feels very artificial. American prosperity relies on an industry that manipulates our minds so that we believe we need more items, newest items deemed in fashion. That's what, I won't read it all. You can read it here. What makes the waste maker such an uncomfortable read is that it's so simply, and it really does explain, many of our desires are not our own. They are the product of an economy and culture that excels in shaping desires and inventing scenarios and fads that draw the attention of our wallets. Very nice phrase there. If being mindful of your consumption for the sake of the environment isn't for you, maybe being mindful for the sake of acting on what you actually want is. Yeah, so one comment here, but wonderfully, I think, explains what's going on with Vance Packard and with the economy here. So our economy is built on the idea that we have to continue growing, that's why manufacturing works. You would think this would benefit us because it would mean that it created jobs and everything. But as you have already seen with the true cost, those jobs are not necessarily good ones, nor have there ever been good ones. And there have always been problems with this. So this person mentioned Thoreau in last week's readings, but let me restate something that I said in the introduction that I wrote to Thoreau. we think that this juggernaut is all industrial, right? And we go back to the Industrial Revolution, whether we're looking at like Manchester in England, or we're looking at a place, as I mentioned, like Lowell, Massachusetts, the closest thing the U.S. had to Lowell. And we think about all about the factories and the people living and working in the factories and the problems there. And there's enormous problems there. And I mentioned people at the time, like Elizabeth Gaskell, while Thoreau was living out on Walden Pond, she wrote a wonderfully disturbing book called Mary Barton, which actually sort of takes you imaginatively inside of factories. But the thing that we often don't think about is that, the Industrial Revolution, so-called Industrial Revolution, was fueled by industry that focused on the textile industry. That's where the Industrial Revolution started, textiles. But in the U.S., those textiles were all about cotton. That's what that machinery in Lowell was making. Where did that come from? It came from the southern states, and it was made possible by out-and-out slavery. Slavery was essential to making the Industrial Revolution happen in the United States. It is at the very core of it. And the fallout that we're having, like with Black Lives Matter today, is coming out of that. Now, go forward to 2020 and 2021, or I guess it was 2015 when it was made the true cost, and you see that is still happening in other places. The problem is the economy is built on trying to get us to buy all that production. So this is kind of the horrible nature of the system, that you had slavery making textiles possible. The textile industry was able to churn out far more garments than anyone could ever need. But then how do you keep this system going? Well, the only way to do it is to convince the consumers to buy far more than you would need, mainly because the factories are producing far more than we need. So they have to convince us to buy it to keep it working. But from the very beginning in the U.S., you can see the horrible problems that it meant, principally in the North for industrial workers and working in those factories. And that's kind of what's still going on, like in Bangladesh. And then, talking about the true cost here, but why the true cost focuses on cotton production in India is because that's the agricultural part of it that goes with it. It doesn't have to be there quite like that. We now have synthetic fabrics and all materials that we're using. But all this is a profound problem. This is the way our economy has been built. And what this person is drawing attention to is that there's this notion that we would just continue on with this juggernaut. But it is an entirely unsustainable juggernaut, and it was entirely problematic from the beginning. I mean, it out-and-out slavery made it possible. Modern slavery still makes it possible in the sense of, what's happening in places like Bangladesh. So it is a huge issue, but this person does such a great, job here of getting right to the central point, that it's all about the way our economy, an industrial economy, functions, and the way advertising has to be deployed. Because if not, you would produce and overproduce, and you'd producing enough clothing so that everybody, and the wealthy countries could get, 60 odd items of clothing a year. Well, okay, but then what? How do you finance that? How can you keep that going? Well, you do it by getting people to buy it. Just as an aside, this is why I think the deep dives are so great, because it is great that people focus on individual things, and it allows me to do what I just did for a few minutes, to unfold what they're saying. And I find that a more interesting approach than if I just had slides up there telling you all this, and the slide, slavery made the Industrial Revolution possible in the U.S. and going through it. I could have done that. I could have delivered those facts in that way. I find this more interesting, and I find it more, evocative of the way traditional classes like small seminars have worked. But we're only going one comment so far, so let me jump ahead. And to go through here, I'll just let you read these, and again, you can pause and read them. Yeah, so great example here, right? soap companies could devote their time and money to actually, and if you didn't have a chance to read it all, hit pause and go back. Soap manufacturers, any company can spend their time and money and making better products, and that would serve us. But a huge amount of their time is on marketing. Some many products, more money is spent on marketing than actually making the products. Let alone on what this person is talking about, R&D, and that would be making better products and all. Marketing is now central to this project, and it has been for 400 years, even before the Industrial Revolution. And I've gone back and looked at it, like in the Renaissance, but you can see why marketing had to be such a big thing in Thoreau's time and why Thoreau was rejecting it. And you can see why now, to get ever more and more, production going, that the marketers had to step up their game, and the internet really helped with that, didn't it? That the internet is not coincidental, that the thing that we see in the true cost, that explosion of consumerism, it has to do with free market economy and all. Absolutely, it's central to it. But on the other hand, I think the internet just played in perfectly into that. So in other words, would fast fashion have happened without the internet? Probably the same way, to the same extent. Yeah, I really doubt that. But let's jump to the next comment. Yeah, the smoking industry and how they ignored the causes. It was their goal to make people addicted in order for the corporations to profit greatly. Our mindset towards wanting more is becoming a serious problem. This is another reason why, as an aside here, why the deep dives to me are so important, and honestly such a treat, because we have such a diverse group of people. I keep saying this, but it's true, with a whole range of different experiences like this person who made a trip to Nicaragua, where I went to volunteer to build a school for a small community. By the way, props to you for doing that. That's terrific. It was there that I learned how consumerism is making my life and others in developed countries worse. So yeah, right. So we get to vicariously go to a place like Indonesia. This person's actually face to face with this world, but in a different way. And here, let this person go on. These people I was lucky to meet were happy and content with what little they had. The locals were always smiling and laughing with each other, which took me by surprise, because in America, where we literally have everything these people don't, we find ourselves unhappy that we can't get the new iPhone or new clothes. These people in Nicaragua don't have money to buy one pair of shoes, yet they seem happier than us who have everything at our fingertips. This was just an eye-opening experience, and hopefully we can change our mindset that are always wired to always want more. What a great comment. And it's a great comment, and you might say, well, that's someone just talking about their experience. What does that have to do with Vance Packard? Shouldn't we be focusing on this historical document from 70 years ago? No, I think that comment is great, because it's another one that gets to the heart of something really important. What if you stepped outside of this consumer economy? What if you stepped outside of the economy where, we're being barraged by all these ads, online and everywhere, and, you had a group of people who didn't have a lot, who weren't told that they need to do this? What would they be like, And I don't want to use these people in Nicaragua as a case study, but hey, it's a lot of the world, and a lot of the world doesn't live the way that we do. That may not be something you or I think about a lot, because, well, pretty much everyone I encounter lives the way that I do. And even when I encounter international students in this class, the very fact that they're here, they probably live a lot like I do. But a lot of the world, most of the world, doesn't. And you might say, isn't that a shame? Because we have so much, and we have all these great things, and, those poor people, they don't have any of it. But what's so great about this comment, go meet some of those people. They are happy. They are smiling. They have trouble buying a pair of shoes, and yet they are happy. And that should send up like a big flag, as it did for the person that made this comment, that there's something wrong here, right? In other words, we're told by this industry that all this is going to make us happy, but, get people away from this industry and they're actually happier, even though they have very little. Does that mean that, everyone in the world should live that way? No. I mean, low to moderate income countries, they really need to progress, not so that they all have the latest generation of smartphone, but so that, everyone has things like electricity and everyone has access to a range of, goods and services that are needed and things like healthcare and all. So, I mean, that has to change, but it is a wonderful case study here in a way. And again, I don't want to be like a sociologist examining people, but it is wonderful to think about, important to think about, that there are people in the world who aren't subjected to this project. And it is not the case that they are less happy than we are. That's the real thing. As this person noted, in this case, they're happier. Okay. Yeah. Nail on the head when you were describing, this person is, by the way, commenting on another comment, how corporations make people want to buy more, buy tobacco, and we're addicted to all sorts of stuff that we don't need. Oh, wait, sorry. Did I put that one twice in a row there? By mistake. Oh, wait. Sorry. Big confusion on my part, not a confusion. This person is now responding to that person. So this comment is in response to the Nicaragua thing. Sorry if you just experienced that, figured that out sooner than I did. When you described your experience in Nicaragua, it made me think how Ken has emphasized over and over that most of the developed world has created exacerbated climate change, and yet we aren't faced with its most disastrous effects. Countries who don't have the means to tackle this issue are faced with the consequences of our action. Yeah, and I do say it over and over again, and I guess I'm saying it again here by drawing attention to this comment. It's absolutely true. So that the really profound, I mean, if you wonder what climate justice is, or environmental justice, or wonder how this is a social justice problem, well, here is just a wonderful example of it, because here are a perfectly happy group of people who are going to be really hit hard by this, who already are being hit hard by, climate change. And that's a profound injustice. And, if you think about it, it's bad enough we have this system that we're in, encouraging us to pursue happiness that we never really get. But all that has really created profound problems for the rest of the world and people who have nothing to do with this. So it's just something to think about. In other words, think outside of the scope of everyone and the world that we live in, to other cultures that live very differently, but not forget the consequences of all this for them and not just us. So in other words, you read Vance Packard, you might be angry that, you're being raised this way, that children are being raised this way, that so much damage has been done by these corporations. And it's very easy to think of that just as involving us, the people in the U.S. and the, wealthier countries. But it has profound implications for the rest of the planet too, and we can't forget that. I mean, it's easy to keep blinders on in their own little world, but we live in a much bigger world, and people all over the planet are impacted by this. People who had nothing to do with it, who were living pretty happy lives, and who wanted to develop and should develop, to have the sort of things that we have, like healthcare and all. Anyhow, let's jump to the next comment. Yeah, written in 1960, just as modern consumerism in the United States was taking root. Now, I'm from China, and modern consumerism is taking its roots here in an extremely rapid pace in recent years. Yeah, the last few decades especially. Therefore, this book has an even closer relationship to me. In the 21st century, the book can be a reflection of the past decades for the developed countries, U.S. and us, right? This is our history. This is a U.S. course, and that's what it is. But it can also be a warning sign to countries that are developing against the potential dangers of consumerism, not to the American people as it was in the 1960s, but the developing countries. Yeah, incredibly concisely and well said. And again, this is to get those blinders off, thinking about this not in a U.S. centric or us centric way, but in a global way. And again, what a wonderful class we have to do that. But it should be a warning sign. This should be, getting the rest of the world should look at what happened here with the American dream and look at it before you adopt the American dream. The American dream, perhaps one of the most sobering thoughts of all about the American dream that we're talking about here. Well, there are different things, right? That we want to think that the American dream is all about democracy and freedom and free speech. And it is, absolutely. But somewhere along the line, maybe from the very beginning, we're not going to talk about that history here. Somewhere along the line, democracy got connected with capitalism. And it is seen like, we live in a wonderful, free capitalist society. Wait, we live in a wonderfully free democratic society. This out and out capitalism is just, a problem. But we are now selling that to the world more than any other product, more than, the array of really, sexy products from Apple that the world, we're trying to sell the world and doing a damn good job of it, by the way. But we're also selling the world on the idea of the American dream. And for people that are in a position to buy that, or not buy it, and this person rightly notes, China is a great example. I think, it should be, to use this person's phrase, a warning sign against the potential dangers of consumerism. It really should. And, as China is poised to take center stage on the world stage as the U.S. moves off, and that's inevitable, that's happening and will happen, will China make the mistakes that we did, that, the example we gave? I think it's a great question, and I think it's a wonderful question for people to think about in the rest of the world, and that is, do we want to adopt this model of consumerism? Can it be changed? It's the same question we're facing in a way, but we've already adopted it. So our challenge is different as to how to get it out of our bloodstream. It's in there. It's in there from childhood and all. But with other countries, it's a somewhat different one, and it should, form a cautionary tale, something to think about for the rest of the world. And I think what's so great about this, and again, if I had been giving a lecture on this, I may not have focused on it, but this is what the comments have done. It's got us focusing on that. And I think that's a really important question to think about, the rest of the world, whether we're talking about Nicaragua or China. Okay. Yeah. I think it is an older book, and I think as a consequence, you might think, well, 70-year-old book, what's it really have to say to us today? 60-year-old book. Well, I keep saying 70. Shocking to see the parallels so expertly drawn to our society today with the issue of consumers and eventual ways exacerbated. The reading, along with the assigned documentaries for the week, which is The True Cost or the episode of Patriot Act on that, opened my eyes to the consumerist ideals of society, in particular the way in which purchasing is seen as a measure of success and as a gateway to happiness by means of advertising. When put this way, it almost feels like we are living in a dystopian society like George Orwell's 1984. Yeah. So a number of great points here. So let's start. First, the notion that, this is almost like a dystopian society. We tend to think that it's just normal, having been born into it. But if you would have come from another time, another place, I don't know how to put it. I think you could write a realistic novel about what's happening in the world today, and you could do it with this issue focusing on consumerism. And if that novel had been presented to people in Thoreau's era, 170 years ago, that it absolutely would have seemed like a dystopian book. I mean, it would have seemed absolutely unbelievable that human beings had been created into like the Matrix type thing of serving corporations and all. So I think it's a really great point to try to think about our culture from another perspective. In other words, to us, it's normal. It's the way life is. That's it. You see the benefits of it. You're told the benefits of it. You can go online and click your way to, every product on the planet pretty much. But, what does this actually mean? What's actually going on? And if you stood back and tried to imagine it from a different kind of perspective, whether it's an imagined one like that, or from the perspective of looking at like Nicaragua, or to some people there, and what, the challenge that China is faced into developing, will they develop as we have? I think these are all great questions. The other thing that this person noted in the comment is really noteworthy, and what is in some ways so prescient about Vance Packard is the very title, The Waste Makers. Packard was not writing in the era of modern environmentalism, really. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring is going to be published a couple years after this book. And the big movement and the environmental movement, all those things like, that led up to the EPA and the first Earth Day and the Santa Barbara oil spill and all that sort of stuff is in the future for Packard yet. But he really put his finger on the problem here. It's not like he could have called the book The Unhappy Makers or something, or the people who make us unhappy, or what makes us unhappy. I could have been a good title for it, but he didn't, and the thing that we should be focusing on, as this person rightly, reminds us, is the waste here. We're talking about it in human terms of why it's so unrewarding and problematic and all, but the downside is the waste. These factories that, in Thoreau's era were churning out, more, items of clothing than anyone could need, now are churning out dozens of times more items than people need. And we are encouraged to buy them and, keep it up. And in past courses, people have noted, and actually people did in some of the comments here, when we get to the true cost, that, encouraged by fast fashion and this sort of, excitement of it all and buying online, many people, noted, and it was quite moving in some cases in those comments, that they have not only have more items than they ever could use, they bought things that they never wore, that they just would buy them, think that they looked really, great. A person noted in the first comment here, it was a really cute outfit, great, and then never wore it, or wore it once or twice. From the point of view of the people making this stuff, marketing this stuff, that doesn't matter. I mean, the important thing is, from their point of view, it stops at one moment. When does it stop? When your Visa credits to their account and they get the money. They want to make you relatively happy, so they allow you, get an exchange or refund, but it's all about that. The life after it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what you do with it, whether you actually enjoy it. But the other thing is the afterlife of all this, which is what Packard focused on. The waste. That's what we really need to not forget. So far we've been talking about this today as a sort of social issue, but the waste of it all is profound, and in a way that Packard didn't quite understand and couldn't quite conceptualize it, because even though we knew about the climate crisis then, and Packard may have known about it actually. It's an interesting question, a historical question. I might pursue that and tell you in a future episode, but it's not just the waste, because that's using the resources up and all, but it's the waste in the sense of the greenhouse gases that are emitted in the process of manufacturing all this that we now have to deal with. But it also makes us aware that what people focused on after Packard, which is why he played a role in helping consolidate the modern environmental movement, we have to deal with all that waste. The waste of disposing of it afterwards. And you saw in the true cost, the idea that you just take it to Goodwill and someone else uses it, that's not the way it works anymore. And also the waste of the manufacturing process, with pollution being released into waterways and aquifers. And I'm talking about like point source pollution from the chemicals that make these materials and all. Plus, this is in water, it's in solid waste, it's in the atmosphere. So all that is a problem in its own right that we sometimes forget in the era of the climate crisis, because we focus on greenhouse gas emissions, which is what is causing the climate change. But all that other waste is still a problem, So remember nothing else. Remember the title of this book, The Waste Makers. This system is a waste-making system. And that is the problem environmentally. And Packard, clearly saw that. That's a great comment. This person continued with the second part. Focusing on the idea of selling to kids. On the other hand, it can be considered downright evil, spawning generations that only know how to purchase and are subconsciously brainwashed into believing that it is the gateway to true happiness and contentment. Yeah, many people drew attention to this in Packard and were shocked by it. And again, this is less about knowing a fact from Packard as it is about having a response, a visceral response to this, and getting you to think about something. Because we can talk about kids, we can talk about my 5-year-old daughter, and I can tell you all the different ways that, marketers are coming at her now. And I'm aware of this. And, I guess I could put her in an isolated little bubble, but I don't think that would work when she encountered friends and all at school who aren't. But it's very disturbing. But another way of looking at that for all of us, myself included, because, I was actually born the year before this book was published in late 1959, but I grew up in this system too, and you really grew up in this system. So we can be frustrated that, marketers are marketing at children and look at children when we say that and think about children when we, are dealing with that frustration. But we are those children too. Even I am one of those children, because I was raised in this culture and you've really been raised in it. And these folks have spent a great deal of time, as this person, calls it here, subconsciously brainwashing us. And we have all been subjected to this. So we are, we are the children that this is focused on. But of course, it didn't end there, because every step of the way in our development, from toddlers to teenagers to people entering the workforce, we have been targeted in different ways by this. And that's something to think about. And again, that's the kind of the matrix thing. We were literally raised by consumerism, raised by this culture of consumerism. And you think you're raised by your parents, and you are, I hope, a little, but it is also the case that through a range of different, outlets, we're being raised by other, I can't even say people, other entities, corporations, for different reasons. And we're not raised, the way our parents might raise us, which is in a way so that we could become happy and find happiness and pursue happiness. But we are being raised for another, purpose, for the purpose of the corporations, to make them happy, to make them successful. And our happiness, even though they're doing the same thing we are as parents, or I am as parents, trying to provide happiness, they're holding out the promise of happiness. That's that is the central selling point. But that's not really what they're delivering. They don't care about delivering happiness. They care about, they don't care about our happiness, rather happiness of the corporations. This person finally concluded, this week made me feel as I've been living as a puppet on strings. Yeah. Wow. That's, such a strong image to think about, that, I'll just pop back on here. We assume, right, that all our actions, if I want to do things, these are my actions and all, but really my actions are being controlled by someone else, is a startling thought. We feel that we have autonomy, we feel we have free will. We're in a country that it's one of its founding precepts is that we're allowed to pursue happiness, and yet maybe we're kind of a puppet to this. And I think that's a startling thought. And by the way, as an aside about what this course is about, this course is about coming to that realization and a bunch of others. And I'm saying you have to buy into that particular image. I think it's a very vivid, great image. But I'm saying I want you to think about this course is designed to get you thinking about your own life. And you may have thought this already. You may have already felt like you're a puppet on strings. I don't know. But that's really what it's about. And it's getting you to think about how it impacts you, but then how it impacts your the planet. What I just said regarding, the waste makers, that this is all about. That one of the things that happens here, the consequences, it just generates enormous amounts of waste too. That's a big part of this. But let me go back to the comment that I was getting to. And this is obsolescence, which is an important issue here. Companies strive to make products that will either decrease in quality, desirability, or function, and they're smart in how they do it. This would include making a product that will break down in a certain amount of time, making a new product that makes the old one seem out of date, and making improved products that function more efficiently. This is what keeps companies profiting and keeps the consumer culture alive. So I actually added here, just so you have them in the notes, Packard's 3 kinds of obsolescence. Obsolescence of function. This is when a product or technology, by the way, I'm enumerating them here because this is probably like the thing that people most remember about Packard or one of the big takeaways. And again, he didn't create all these, but he's articulated them well. This is when a product comes along that makes the new one seem inferior. So that idea is that, the newest smartphone now has multiple cameras. So even though your smartphone may do everything that you want and you may be happy with it, well, it has this new, function that means you want to get rid of the old one. Even though your old one may be perfectly good and could last for years. It may not for other reasons we'll get to in a moment. But the idea is that, the functionality is increased. And of course, look at any, I'll just call them out, but you can talk about any company here, but look at any Apple event. Apple has as much fanfare, has these events. They introduce a new product. And what's it all about? More function, new technology. You can do things more. You can take better pictures because you have 3 cameras now. Obsolescence of quality is when an object falls out of use because it is worn out or broken. And this would be, at the time, a lot of people talked about this in Packard's era, and this is why Volkswagen ran an ad about it, is the cars were designed that way. In other words, say like wheel bearings on a car. It would be possible to build a car with wheel bearings that would last for hundreds of thousands of miles. But they don't want that, the car manufacturers, because they want you to come back and buy a new car instead of keeping yours for hundreds of thousands of miles. So the wheel bearings break down. And they'll break down at a period of time that they often kind of project it with great precision. So it's 75,000 miles, for example, your wheel bearings would go. And then at 80,000 miles, your, water pump would go or whatever. And, one person noted here talking about their family that, their car, like it seems like everything keeps going wrong and you have to take it back and back. Well, arguably that's, obsolescence of quality right there coming into play. It's also the case that in a sort of roundabout way that happens with something like smartphones. So I'll pop back on here. When I first got, so I had an iPhone 5 for years and years, and I finally updated to a newer one because I had problems that I couldn't ultimately resolve. But the new one I had for 2 or 3 days before, and it's the newer generation of iPhone with the rounded edge, it's XR. And for 2 or 3 days before I got a case, because I got the phone before the case, and I held it in my hands, I kept dropping this damn thing. I mean, because if you think about it, it is so smooth and so perfect that I just wasn't used to it because I had a case before that had like a little more grip, and I kept dropping it. And I'm really happy in those 2 or 3 days I didn't break the screen, which happens. Well, you could probably argue that was designed. That was designed so that, you would break your screen eventually, and the screen is by no means easy to replace, so that you would have to then go ahead and buy a new phone because it becomes broken. In other words, you could argue that that phone seemed like, I'm not going to argue because Apple will probably come and try to sue me, but it seems like it's the case that, it is certainly open to the possibility of breaking as part of its design. So not that it wears out, but that it will break. And, if you look at some of the, like really tougher cases for phones, for years, they've made cases that, built to military standards that you could drop from, tall as I am, 6 feet tall, and nothing happens. And you could drop them, put them underwater and nothing happens. From the very beginning, even though they weren't able to make phones, I don't think, at least they didn't do it, a decade ago, they had these cases that would have made phones pretty much impervious to a lot of things. But why didn't they build a phone that way to begin with? Well, that's kind of counterproductive from their point of view, wouldn't you think? And then, of course, obsolescence of desirability, when something is rendered old hat by the arrival of newer, more exciting options. And of course, this is the one that's big right now. So when, I guess Apple's my go-to example today, when, you watch that Apple event, the phone is just so much more desirable because, I remember a few years ago, Apple did this big thing. Suddenly, phones were not just the colors that you could get them, black or silver or whatever, but rose gold was the new color. And everyone wanted rose gold. That was the thing to have, the most desirable thing. So, if everyone you knew were buying rose gold. And by the way, just to give you a close, this is my understanding, I think it's right, that when they were developing the rose gold iPhone, it was code name in Apple, the Cardassian. And the idea was it was this bling phone, basically, this flashy phone. And the notion, of course, is, suddenly, your friends are getting this rose gold phone, then, your phone is obsolete. It could be perfectly fine. It could be working for fine. It could work better, continue to work fine for decades. It could have 3 cameras, who knows? But suddenly it's less desirable for that reason. Packard identified these. There are other ways that I think obsolescence happens, but Packard did a nice job of giving us like the 3 basic categories. But more importantly, I think, is the notion that the products are designed to become obsolete because it serves that same project in a different kind of way. In other words, you keep selling all these items, to people. Well, how are you going to get them to buy replacement ones? The obsolescence of desirability, that is a holdover from the fashion industry, the textile industry, because that's how it works, right? Every season, the old season becomes a little less desirable, or perhaps not desirable at all, as the new product comes on the scene. So that has always been around, but then there are these new ways. It would be like designing a garment to break apart over a period of time, which some fast fashion does. So it's an important observation on Packard's part. So let's go to a couple more. There are the soft and incessant commercials for youngsters here during the weekly 20 hours of television watching. There are the breakable toys, which teach them at an early age that everything in this world is replaceable. That is a wonderful comment, I think, because the idea that we are born into a culture of things that are cheap and replaceable is, arguably, as this person notes, it happens at a very young age with children. So in other words, it's not like you were given an object that could last for years. You'd be given, like, I guess it was maybe not as a very young child. Let's say you're given a baseball bat. What can go wrong with a baseball bat? I mean, I guess if you're a really great baseball player, you could break the bat, wooden bat, or hit it. But I mean, for the most part, nothing is going to go wrong with that. And you would have an object that you would value over years. And actually, thinking back to my own childhood, baseball gloves used to be that. So the idea that a glove would get worn in and people would oil it and it would get better over time, and people were sort of very attached to those sort of objects. I'm just thinking of like a childhood object. And a glove would be a good example. It just got better and better over time, and it was meaningful. But what this person is drawing attention to is very much on the mark, that That's not the case anymore. It's all disposable junk. As Juliet Schor says in one of the, I think in the minimalism documentary that we saw, Juliet Schor is the person who coined that idea of plenitude economy, which is one of the alternate films. But it's all junk. And what this person is saying in the comment, that kind of sets us up for an understanding of how products work. They're short-lived junk. And that begins, according to this person, and I think it's absolutely positively right, that begins at childhood. So it's bad enough that, all these objects are hitting us, and we can talk about each one of them in particular. But there is sort of a common theme here, is that they're disposable junk. And that is a lesson learned by children, according to this person, I think very early, and I think it's absolutely right. And that itself is startling. I think really startling. Yeah. I read the sentence that I realized that I grew up watching commercials and it shaped my attitude about consumers. I still remember the commercials in which an actor encourages us to purchase their products as soon as possible. Many kids have been impacted by those commercials, and their idea about consumption is gradually shaped by them. It's scary to think that people at such a young age have been negatively impacted by the capitalists who want to maximize their products, and the formation of our values is shaped while we didn't realize it was being formed. I think that's absolutely right. And I think what's so great about this person's comment, the way this person started it, shaped in ways that we may not even know. I mean, it's not shaped in the sense of just buy, but it's shaped to don't have big expectations here for these products. These are not going to last long. These are not going to be things that you cherish, that you value, that grow better over time, like a baseball mitt that gets, more and more softened and used. And no, that's not the way this works. This stuff is here today, gone tomorrow. Accept that fact. That's the way life is. Here we're teaching you about life. These are the objects which you surround yourself. They're cheap. They're disposable. They are fun for a while, and then they're gone. That's the lesson. That's the childhood lesson here. And as this person notes, stopping, the goal of this cast, stopping to think about that is how you and I were raised, and the way that this functions. And that goes back to the puppet on the string thing, or I'm sure you can come up with other, analogies that you really might want to stop and think about this, or, with the class, that's the goal here. We see gendered ads for men and women's products, or things that shouldn't even be gendered, like shampoo, shaving cream, deodorant. Usually women's products are more expensive than men's. Really no need to have hygiene products gendered. Corporations advertise such products as a way to make us feel as if we have to stick with what is targeted toward our gender. The whole matching thing, matching clothes and all. I'm just going through this quickly because I want to get a couple more done before we leave. It's scary how easily convinced we can be that we need certain stuff that actually is unnecessary. The growing consumption just creates more waste and more harm for the environment. This is one of the reasons I want to get to that end point, but let me jump back on here to say many people in their comments noted that Packard was gendered, and Packard is from an era right before the real big feminist revolution in the 1960s and 70s. But it is also the case, unquestionably, that men and women are targeted differently. And what's so interesting and actually makes Packard seem a little quaint is back in his era, gendered. It was like sort of startling for him that suddenly there's a different shampoo for men than there is for women, and why you're encouraged to buy the two, and again to sell more stuff. But it is also the case that, and let's not forget, as many people reminded us in the comments, that this is gendered, that the advertisers, come at men differently than they come at women. And what's most startling about that, I think, is that they are, I don't know how to put this, but in some ways, the ones who are creating the gendered self. What I mean by that, from little girls onward, and I mentioned in my introduction, one of my introductions, the notion that what a woman is and what a woman is like is being presented to them again and again. And most I would say today, a big part of that is like with online influencers who are themselves young women who are, they're presenting who they are to girls, and girls trying to figure out, what kind of an adult will I be? And this person is offered up as a model. And of course, then online influencers monetize that by selling cosmetics or hygiene products, as this person noted, and all, and fashion as well. So all that is done to, to raise children in a certain way, but as many people note it, in very gendered ways and in very binary ways, right? And that's, what I mean is, you because it's coming out of this older model, as there's the male, there's the female, and you pick which one you are or whichever one you're told you're supposed to be, and go there. That itself is problematic to begin with, right? Because that creates a very locked-in binary when really there doesn't have to be. And this person, I think, rightly notes with like hygiene and all. I mean, I'm sorry, why can't we all have the same deodorant? Which is what this person is asking. Yeah, so it's something to think about, and we don't have time to do a lot of that here. But maybe this will encourage you to think about the ways that they are not only raising us, but raising us in certain ways, in certain gendered ways, and certain binary ways. And that itself, why is it done? Well, it's done for obviously for their profit. What does it do to us, though? That's the thing. So let me go back to this person's other comment here. At the end of the day, we can't really place the blame on consumers, but rather on the corporations that hire people to advertise consumption in such a clever and convincing ways. This type of advertising really is like propaganda. So I'm going a while, and I'm going to end on this comment because I think it's a good one, and I think it gets to a really big question that I asked you, that people addressed in their comments, and that people may be struggling with and all. And that is, okay, this is what's happening here, but who is to blame? When I started today in there, I said that, it is both, the corporations and us, but that's a good answer, I guess. But it's useful to think about how that gets fleshed out. In other words, for you today, what is the answer? And you could see two routes, and we're going to talk about those. And it may seem that this course is all about the first route, but it's the second as well. What I mean by that is, okay, you are aware of this, you watch the true cost, and you're like, okay, I get the minimalism thing. I see why people are going in that direction. So let's stay right with clothes for a moment, because that's something that, your generation especially, you would know about, because you're in the position of being buying clothes and all now, as opposed to like, you're not really thinking about buying a house now, probably not even a car, maybe a car, I don't know, but clothes or something. Well, you could think you'll go the minimalist route and just stop and just not do it anymore, just not go along with the project. And that's absolutely fine. But in so doing, you've taken that all on yourself. You've saying, by strength of will, I will do this. By the way, you may not succeed at that. I mean, don't underestimate how successful marketers are and the social pressure that they create. So you may say, I'm going to just wear the same clothes from 4 years ago and just keep doing it. Yeah, social pressures, which have been, orchestrated by all this, will be strong. But let's say you do it even. But that is only one way of approaching this and one solution to it. But we also have to remember that the system is still in effect. When you're doing that, the whole system is still there. You can, hope to influence it by voting with your dollars, by not supporting fast fashion outlets, for example. Sure, if enough people do that, it'll hurt them. But the other thing to think about is how to go about reforming the system. So in other words, personal change on the one side, system change on the other. How do we go about restructuring this system? How do we go about reeling in consumers, marketers? How do we go about putting limits on what they can do? How do we go about stopping them from doing certain things? I don't know the answer to all that. Government intervention certainly would be a start. Making people aware of it That's the little thing that I can do regarding this, because I'm trying to make you aware of it. But I don't know the big answer to it. But I do know, and this is why I'll end with this, that's kind of, is one of the things that has been handed to you. And that is, okay, there's the problem. We've known about it since before I was born. My generation didn't do anything about it, unfortunately. It only got worse during our watch, a lot worse. Now you are ready to take over the reins of this planet. What can you do about this? And we could talk more about that. And I've actually thought about doing a whole course on that, on what to do and how to initiate system change in general. And maybe one day I will. But, you don't need that course. I mean, there's the problem. You're smart people, you're educated people. That's what really needs to be done here. That's what needs to be thought about. There are other issues too. Right? This whole course is a range of issues. But I just want to leave you thinking about that, thinking about the two, approaches here, personal change and system change, and how all this, can be addressed, because it absolutely has to be addressed. And again, not necessarily just because of, personal happiness and all that, but as Packard says, because this is a waste making system, and that is simply unsustainable. We no longer have the resources to produce all this stuff. We no longer have the ability to handle the point source pollution, the, acres and acres and millions of acres of plastics and all, but we also just can't, keep pumping all these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So, okay. Oh, gee, sorry to leave you on a kind of pessimistic note, but I don't really mean to. I mean, if it's a challenge, and it's an important one, but I think the biggest thing to do with anything like this is to identify the problem. Once you identify the problem, then you can roll up your sleeves and start working on solutions. And again, if you thought that the solutions are going to be wind turbines and solar, which is great, but it's not all. There are other solutions that are needed, and to other problems. And this, rampant consumerism is another really big problem. Okay, so take care, and the next deep dive will be on similar related issue, but kind of a specific example, which is fashion industry, and that will be on the true cost and the episode from Patriot Act. Okay, take care.